and one simple basic overview I have given about the forms. The form tag and its attributes we learned. And for the form tag attributes, so we discussed about the methods, what is post. Yeah, these are the basics we discussed about the form. So we learned about the form element, and in the form element about the attributes like name, ID, class, method. So what is difference between get and post methods, and when to use get and when to use post. These are the options. Next, after understanding the form element, another important is we need to know about the input element. The input element. So usually we call this as a form input element. Form input element. So what is that form input element and how do we use the form input element? So actually the HTML input element is used to create interactive controls for web-based forms in order to accept data accept data in order to accept data from the user. So that is actually the main purpose of this input. Technically, input element is used to create interactive controls for web-based forms in order to accept data from user. So that means it allows the user to input a value. It allows to input a value. Now, how these input options will work, we will see one simple example. What are the input options and how do we handle the input options? And what are the attributes available with these input options? Let's see. First, important is generally this input is enough to accept input from the user. So for example, I will show you a simple form. So let's add a new file and name it as input element.html. Here we are designing, so we are creating a doc type HTML head and a title, and we are creating a name some input demo, and I'm designing a body. In that we have a form. Already last session we discussed about form. what attributes are required. As of now, I just keep it empty. So form here have a simple header. So I just keep a header as a register. And below this, I am creating a simple data list and a data term. And let's add some details. Username and another one is password. Okay. And another option is date of birth. Next, here some age. Another term is age. And you have options like email. So just basic some details. We want the user to enter the details. Initially, for username, password, date of birth, age, email. So we are defining a simple empty place is configured here. Let's add a style temporarily. So for form, I defined width as 300 pixel. So margin auto and padding as 20 pixel and border some 2 pixel solid and dark scene. Okay. So border radius is some 10 pixel. So this is another data term. Wherever data term is there, font weight is bold. Font weight bold for data term. And let's run this and see here. So this is the basic form we have designed. And in this username, password, date of birth, age, email, user have to input a value. Generally, to input value, technically, in order to input value, we have to just use input element. You can see here I'm just using input element. That's it. I'm using input element. I will copy this and I will use it for every field. I'm just adding this input element. That means age input, email input, date input, and all. You can observe that when I refresh this, an input control comes everywhere. That means username. To input username, there is an option here. So to input password, to input date of birth, to input age, to input email. So one input is enough that allows to input any value. I will remove that register, just a form I will keep here. It allows to input any value. So that means the input element, it creates a control from where user can input the value. So it accepts the user input from the user. Actually, input element allows to input any type of value. HTML can restrict the input value type by using type attribute type attribute. That means currently input is one element which allows to input any value. So you can see here input is allowing to input any value. You can use it for text, you can use it for password, you can use it for date of birth, you can use for age, you can use for email, anything. But the problem is password is not masking the characters. Date of birth is not having a proper date value. Age should have a proper number value. Email should be in a proper email format. So we need some restrictions. Currently, input allows to input any type value, but we need to restrict the value. In order to restrict the value, HTML have provided some data types which you can define by using type attribute. So that means HTML can restrict the input value type by using type attribute. And important is the available data types. Are what are the available data types? That means what data types it is allowing. The available data types that you can use for input. So what are those available data types? We will see that. So many data types are available. First, we will see the data types. What are the available data types? Actually, the available data types, we have a number. So number is a type. We have text. We have password. We have color. So we have date. We have range. We have date time, local. Date time local. We have email. We have file. We have URL. We have hidden. So we also have image. We have month. So month is also a type. So we have like search. We have like tell. We have like time and week. These are all the types. Basic types. Data types. I am telling you about the important data types. That means HTML provides a type attribute. By using the type attribute, you can restrict input to a number or a text or password or color or date, range, date, time, local, email, file, URL. I will show you how we can manage that. We will see. Initially, these are the data types available. These data types will change the behavior of input element. They change the behavior of this input element. Currently, input element is just like a box. It allows to input any type of value. It's just like a box. It allows to input any type of value. Suppose here I am adding option like color, and I'm adding option like photo. I'm adding option like quantity, or say price range like this. And everywhere we have just initially input. We have just only input. We defined just input. And the input will give you this. And you can see all are input only. All are input only. Many times these are considered as text boxes. These are considered as text box. Many times when people properly don't know about HTML, when you ask how we can get a text box, then they say we have to use input type text. Actually, input type text is not text box. Directly input is text box. I am not using any type attribute here. I'm just using only input. That means directly input is text. Now, if anyone asks what is this type is equal to text, it means that you are restricting the data type as string type. Text means it's a string type. So that means whatever the value entered into it, it should be a string type value. So technically, it is a string type. So you should never say that input type text will get a text box, because in HTML, input itself gets a text box. Type text is not text box. Type text is restricting the data type. Similarly, for password, we have the type password. For date of birth, we have the type date. For age, we have the type number. For email, we have the type email. For color, we have the type color. For photo, we have the type file. And price range, we have the type as range. We have the type as range. Once you give these types, you can observe now, when I define these types, automatically I refresh this page. You can see the behavior of these inputs will change automatically. The behavior of input will change automatically. You can see now here, I will keep a button inside the form, just temporarily. Later we will learn about button, register. Okay. Now important is I am typing some username. So that is a string type. I am typing some password. It will mask with password characters. I am typing here date of birth. You see date picker will come. I can choose a date from the date picker. Age, you can see a numeric up down will come. We can select a number. If I try to type some text inside it, it's not working. It will allow to handle only numeric values. We will learn other properties. Currently, we are just learning only one property. And see email. I am typing some John and I click submit, register. Then email will alert us a message. Please include @ in email. That means you are not entering a proper email. So that means you need to enter a proper email. Then it is fine. Color, I can click and select a color picker here. I can choose a color picker here. Photo, I can click and choose a file here. I can select any file and I can choose any file here. So that file comes here. Price range, a slider allows to change the values through a slider. This is only design. How we can get the values, use the values, that's all JavaScript we have to learn. Now input is the element and type is an attribute. The type indicates what type of value you want to allow. What type of value you want to allow. So number, text, password, color, date, range, date, time, local. I just used here date. I just used here date of birth as date. So here input type instead of date, I'm using like date time. Date time. Actually, this is date time. And here date of birth, date time. This date time is no longer available. That is the old option. We have to use date time local. Earlier, we have date time, but now in the latest versions, it's changed to date time local. That means date time local. And date time local is responsible for displaying here date and time values. So you can choose here date and both time values. So the date value and the time value, we are choosing those date time values. So date, only date, date time local, it will give you date time. So email is restricting email. File is allowing to upload file. URL is actually, suppose under that email address, under the email, I am typing here your website, and here I want to allow input type is equal to URL. Input type is equal to URL. That means it should allow only to enter an URL. It should allow only to enter an URL. You can see your website. URL means it should be in a proper URL form. http://www.amazon.in like this. If we are not entering a proper URL form, then I try to register, then it says please enter URL. It shows that message. We need to enter a proper URL, then it is fine. It can be submitted. So you can restrict URL. You can restrict email. So by using these types, URL and email, you have an input as month. You have input as month. That means it allows you to input the month and year, only month and year. Suppose here in the date time, date of birth, I am changing this to input type as month. When I change it to month, you can see that now it will allow you to choose the month. It will allow you to choose the month and year. Year will be there. So that means you can choose the year and you can choose the month. So month and year. This is years. You can scroll up and select a year, and you can choose the year and you can choose the month. That is the input type as month. Input type as month. So it will allow, another important is week. So that means for dates we have input type as week. If I give week, that means it allows you to select a week here. You can choose that the week of any particular month, we can select the week. That means that week, it will select the week number. If I want to deal with the entire week related values, generally we have to design in such a way that user can select 1 week, specific date time. You can use a week. We can use time. That means if I am defining time, that means it allows you to input only the time values. Only the time value. You can choose only the time values. You can choose only the time value. You can define by using these options. So we have a date, we have date time local. So we have a month, we have time, and we have week. So number, text, password, color, date, range, date time, email, file, URL. These are the input types, the new input types we are having. There is an input type image also. There is an input type image. Actually, input type image is usually used to keep some images. Actually, it is used for buttons. Input type image is actually image button. It is used for image buttons. But means you can put some picture inside the button. Some picture inside the button. So that is input type image actually. So in the design, suppose I'm using here instead of button, I'll just beside it. Input type is equal to image. We have image. Usually image will have an attribute source src, and I'm applying some images slash. I'm applying some image. Suppose I'm writing some back to top JPG. You can keep any image. I'm just temporarily using back to top JPG. Then actually it should get that image here. Its height is very large. We need to set a reasonably small image. Suppose I define some logo.png. It will get that image here. We need to take small images. We need to create small images. Usually it is used for buttons. Actually, we can use here width, how much. So width is suppose 100. Height, how much? Height is suppose 50. That means the width and height will be adjusted for that here. And I'm adding a width and height. Height is suppose 20. And you can see that image will come like this. Actually, this is a button. It is a button. It is a button. And one specialty about this image button is actually This image button can submit where you clicked on that image. That is the specialty actually. So this image button, I clicked somewhere here and it submitted. You see at the URL, it says x-axis 12 and y-axis is 10. That means where you clicked on this, I clicked at the right side corner and it says x-axis is 94, y-axis is 9. It will get that value and display that value. Input type image is actually image button. We can keep reasonable images. So depending on our requirement, suppose we have a login button, register button, cancel buttons, we can design some icons and we can use them. So technically, we can input a graphical button. So we can add graphical buttons. So what is this number? Technically, input type number. And how do we deal with that? So let's keep this so that it is easy for definition. That means it is easy for definition. I will add a simple definition for that here. Yeah. Actually, so once we want a number, let's keep a short definition here. So it allows technically what is number. So input numeric value, and this is for input numeric value. This is just to input numeric value. Text is to input string. Password is to input masked characters. And color is to input a color. Date, so input a date value. It inputs a date value. And the range input a number, numeric value, user using slider. It inputs a numeric value using slider. Date time local, input both date and time values. Email validates email input. It validates email input. File allows to browse and select a file. Allows to browse and select a file for upload. URL allows input of virtual path. So with protocol and domain. Hidden, I will show you. We haven't discussed that. Inputs a button with image. Month inputs month and year. So time, it inputs time value. Week inputs week number. And year actually, week number and year. And month actually. Okay. These are the things we already saw. These are all the various inputs we have here. We have input hidden. We have input search. input tell. Actually, tell is inputs telephone number. So it is in US format. So it is not useful for us because it inputs telephone number in US format. So we don't prefer that regularly. So we want our own Indian format or some other format, then we can change with a different option. But this tell is not suitable every time. Why it is not suitable every time? Because technically it is for telephone number in US formats. So that is not enough for our type of requirements. That's the reason we don't prefer that. We don't prefer that value. That is actually how we can manage this input. You have input search. Actually, the purpose of input search is nothing but usually when you define input search also looks like a text box only. Generally, search also looks like a text box. But what happens is it is specially designed for search queries which are submitted as query string, So, for example, I'm defining here another option. So data term as such, and data definition, I'm using input type is equal to search. And you can see here, I'm having that input type search. So that means this is the input type search. It is just like a text box. I'm entering some values, some HTML, and click on the button. Then its intention is to submit its value so that we can search and use that value. But usually, search cannot handle any value or submit any value. So until or unless it is defined with some ID and some name, we have to use this with a combination of JavaScript also actually. So this requires an ID. Search query like this. I'm giving search query. It requires some name. So that means query. And I am using that ID and name. And you can see I'm entering some JavaScript. And I click on register. You can see it will submit that query JavaScript. This is for every element. Every element, if you want to submit the values, you have to use a name and IDs. So later we have to collect them and we have to use them. We need to collect and use them. So technically, search is very much used when we are dealing with queries, searching for values and dealing with the queries. Later, with the JavaScript, it will be very helpful for you to handle these search options. In JavaScript, I will show you there is a search object, search option for accessing the query string and using the query string. That we will see later. But initially, it is just like a text box. But intention is to pass some such queries so that we can submit the query and we can access the value and use the value in our scripts. That is what actually the concept of search. That means it inputs a query. it inputs a query used for searching, used for searching the site for any content, used for searching the site for any content. That is actually done through search. And one more important input type is hidden. Actually, hidden is very important in future because sometimes in the form, we want some value to be used in the background but not shown to the user. For example, actually, every user is having a user ID. When user is doing some modifications, we need to submit that user ID. Without submitting the user ID, you should not allow to submit the data. But user ID is one option which user need not to see and user need not to modify. It should be sent in the background. That means I want some values to be sent in the background without showing them on the screen. When form is submitted, I want some values to be submitted. Then we will use input type is hidden. And here I will give a name as user ID. I will give a value as some John 123. That is the user ID. Later, I will tell you what is name and value. In the next point, we will discuss that. Initially, hidden, you can observe that I have written it above username. And you see here, above username, there is no element at all. I am entering John. I am entering some password, some details. When I click register, you can see that the data is submitted. And observe carefully, it is submitting a user ID in the background. This user ID is not there inside the form to see, but it is kept in the background to send. That means many times we need to submit some details in the background without showing them inside the form. In that case, why we don't want to show? Because they need not to view it. We don't need any modifications in that. Then we generally use a hidden field. Input type hidden will keep some value, and that value will be submitted when form is submitted. And very important is the value can be accessed and used, but it cannot be viewed directly in the form. Suppose if I change the form method to post, you know that you cannot see that in the URL. Yesterday we saw that if I don't want to show in the URL, I want to submit without appending to URL, then we need to use the form method as post. Then this value is submitted without showing to you. This situation comes in various occasions. Suppose you are making some changes, but few values you need not to change. And without sending the value, you cannot update. So for example, generally in the database, means actually in real time in the backend database, what happens is in the backend database, we write queries like this. Update table, TBL employee or TBL users, update table, set name. So set name is equal to some name, like this. We are just defining some parameter here. So that means we are setting the name, we are setting the password. So some password, just roughly I'm writing, where user ID is equal to some ID parameter is coming. This is the unique field. We have to submit the data. Based on this user ID only, every update will happen. So without sending this user ID, you cannot submit other details. But user ID should not be modified. It should be taken automatically in the background. Such situations will come. In that case, what we do is we follow this technique. We keep that user ID in the background and we send it when form is submitted. But we will never show that on the screen. We'll never allow to make any changes into it. Of course, if you want, you can allow changes also into this field. So you can send a dynamic value into that. But its intention is to not to show the value and send the value. That is why it is hidden, input type hidden. So these are all hidden. That means it allows to submit a value without displaying in the page, That is the input hidden type. These are all the input types available for this input element. So input itself allows you to input value. But if you want to restrict the type, then you can use all these input types. We have a number type, we have a text type, we have a password, we have a color, we have date, so we have a range, we have date time local, we have email. So the email, email is to validate email. So we have a file which is used to validate, which is used to allow input of file. We have URL, so we have hidden, and we have button, image, so month, and search, and telephone, and time. These are all the basic inputs. And we have a week. These are all the basic inputs. We are all using these basic inputs. So technically, the purpose of these input types to allow input of value and restrict that value. So these are actually some are new types available. In early versions of HTML, we don't have all these. So we don't need to discuss like previous version this, current version this, because almost I told you that more than 8-10 years. So we are using advanced versions only. So that's the reason we don't need to worry about what is there in HTML4 and all. We need to just learn what is there in the current version, because this is the standard one we are using regularly now. So now these are all the new input types. So if you want to restrict the input type, these are the new types you have to use. Now, every input have a lot of attributes. Those attributes we will see how we can deal with the attributes. These are types. And I hope everyone is clear with these types. What is a number, what is text, what is password, color, date, and all. You can test that with this example. I'm just passing this example into it. I will just copy that example here. This is just only to understand type, only one option. And this is an example for that. I'm just adding that example here. So in this example, I just used all the important types available for input. available for input. Yeah. Now comes important is input element attributes. Input element have a lot of attributes that is important. What are the attributes for input element? So many attributes are there for input element. What you learnt, all these are input types. We have a lot of input attributes, and according to the situation we need to learn and understand these attributes. Let's see how we can use these attributes. What are the attributes of input and how do we work with these attributes? Input related attributes. Let's see. Basically, so many attributes are there. Important, let's check those attributes. So many are there, one by one we will see. So we have, one is attribute. What are the attributes? And description. In the attributes, we have an attribute. One is name. And you know that attribute name. What is the purpose of name? We know that. It defines a reference name. And you know that which can be common for multiple elements. Common for multiple elements. And very important is one more point you need to know about this name is, the key point is actually form cannot submit the value of any element if it is not defined with name. So name is mandatory. Form cannot submit the value of any element if it is not defined with name. This is very important. For example, see here. So we have a username, we have password, and I refresh here. This is the page. Username is John, password some 123, and date of birth some time I am selecting, age some number I am choosing, email some john@gmail.com, like this. I'm entering so many details, www some amazon.in. I'm entering some details, I'm choosing some here and slider and some values. And when I click register, observe carefully. When I click register, in the URL, only user ID and query are submitted. Others are not submitted. Other values are not submitted. So why other values are not submitted? Even you design on post, those values are not submitted. Why they are not submitted? Because in order to submit, they should have a name. Suppose I will give name as username. So, and when you are giving the names, we can follow a tradition, rule, some certain standards. Like when you give a name for any element inside the form, always use first three characters, lowercase, and they should indicate what type of element it. This is the tradition. You can give anything, but you should give name in such a way that the first three characters lowercase should tell what is the element type. It is text. Okay, for what purpose you are using? That means when you are giving a name for any element, always follow the standards of naming. What is the standard of naming? Names must be in camel case. We generally call this as camel case. Camel case means first characters start with lowercase. In between, there will be an uppercase, then again lowercase. This is called camel case. And the prefix should tell what type of object it is. Suffix should tell for what purpose it is. For what purpose it is for username. So what type it is? Text box. Suppose you are giving password, then name as PWD. So password. Or you can simply say, so TXT PWD. That means it is also a text box with password input. So this is a name as TXT DOB. That means date of birth. This is for age, then name as TXT age. This is the tradition. And for email, so we have some TXT email. This is how we give the names. You can give any name. You can give in any way, but we have to follow certain rules and traditions while working in a real world environment. And this is how we define the name. You can give in any way, doesn't matter as of now as a learner. But for real world, we have to follow certain standards. That is the reason when you define a name, you make sure that the names are configured in this way. Now up to email, I given some names. And now once you refresh this here, you entered username, you entered password, and you entered date of birth, some time, and the age, some age, and email, some email. And I click on submit, register. You can see all the details are submitted at the top. And remember, all details are not submitted at the top. Only the details that are defined. Now it is visible. Huh? Only the details that are defined. Only the details that you are defined with name, those are submitted. TXT name is submitted. Only those details are submitted. Right. So check your side if you have any problem, right? It is visible to all other people. So you check your side if you have any problem in the screen visibility. Okay. Right. So this is the basic important attribute. Name. So name is very much important. And while naming the elements, always use camel case for representing. Always use camel case for representing. And technically, syntactically, how we define. So input type is equal to text and name is TXT name, like this. That's how generally we are configuring the name. Right. That's just a simple concept how we define the names. Now several more attributes are there for input element. Lot of attributes are there for input element. And what are these attributes and how to use, that we will see in tomorrow's session. Right? Tomorrow we will continue with all attributes and we will discuss about attributes. Today we just learned about various types and tomorrow we will discuss about the other options, right?